Hey, Shalom Akim, Shalom, Shalom. All praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Ba'ashem, Yahweh Shai, Ba'ashem, Rakak, Kwadash. Double honors the apostles and the elders, great millstone, for teaching us his truth and salutations to the sincere Akim and Aqua. For me, listen. May the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Brother Raquai. I'm back in here with another quick and Lord's will is always an edifying lesson. And for today's lesson, I kind of just wanted to touch on this word here. It's called anastrophe in the Greek, right? So, what briefly inspired this lesson was just conversation. And something that you might notice is that the type of discourse and the type of conversations that you have with, you know, with brethren, with those that actually have a healthy fear of Yahweh Bashim Yahushai, godly men, is vastly different from the type of conversations that you have with, people that you might be surrounded at, whether it's at home or at your job, or frequent social spaces that you might frequent, and it's vastly different, because the things that they discuss is not on a very, very high vibration, as opposed to, when you speak amongst, brethren, then it's the vibration of that conversation is vastly different, So what I wanted to do is to go into this word conversation, what it actually means. And, Lord's will is always, this will be an edifying lesson. So let me just start off by defining the word conversation. What is it? What does it actually mean, right? Sometimes it's a word that, we kind of like, we haven't we use often, but, for edification's sake, I want to go into what it actually means. So this is conversation in the etymology here, and it says a place where one lives or dwells. It says general course of actions or habits, manner of conducting oneself in the world. It says behavior, life, a way of life, monastic life, frequent use, frequent abode and place. It says to live, dwell, live with, keep company with, right? So it's essentially it's a manner of life. And when you look at the manner of life, the way our people conduct themselves, their conversation is essentially pretty much dim, right? It's pretty much on a very, very low vibration, right? Their manner of life is very, very abominable. They don't live in a way that is very, very conducive towards pleasing the Heavenly Father, right? And it shows, right? Scriptures talk about a tree is known by its fruits, right? And when you go into that word fruits, the word there in the Greek is karpos, meaning works or deed. Their deeds are essentially evil. And Yahweh Shai even said that, I know. Let me actually get that. I'll start off there. John 3. Okay, this is John 3, verse 19, and it says this, and this is the condemnation of the world. Sorry, this is the condemnation, that light is come into the world, and men love darkness rather than light, because their deeds are evil. For everyone that doeth evil hateth the light, neither cometh to the light, lest their deeds should be reproved, right? So a lot of, our people, they cannot stand the light. They cannot stand the prophets, because, as the scriptures say, they're hewn by the prophets. Their deeds, their manner of life, their conduct, their conversation as a whole is very, very dark. It's very dim. It doesn't actually bring forth life. It actually brings forth death because it's riddled in sin. It has a bunch of what's it called? Their works are essentially pretty much evil, right? So when you speak to people, you notice there's a very very vast difference in the way that you know in the type of discourse that they have. It's very very cheap. It's very very frail. It's very very it's not people who you can actually have a very thorough well-rounded discussion with, right? I'm speaking mostly about our people because they're destroyed for lack of knowledge, right? um so what briefly inspired this, it was actually was this precept here. I think it's second. This is Second Peter's. I'll just read verse 10. Second Peter's 3 verse 10. But it says, "But the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, which the heavens shall pass away with a great noise, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat. The earth also, the works that are therein, shall be burned up," right? So there's a lot of, especially America will be hit with nuclear fire, with the missiles, and that invasion of the chariots, right? So that because America is essentially, their sins have reached up to heaven, right? Their manner of life, the way the people, especially our people, with the way that they conduct themselves in this society, is not a godly life. It's not a pious life. It's not a humble life. It's a very satanic life. It's a very adversarial life towards actual life, right? um the scriptures talk about how Babylon shall essentially face the same judgment as Sodom and Gomorrah, in pursuant to Isaiah the 13th chapter, right? So that is that nuclear fire and that huge judgment that shall fall upon Babylon, right? But the only reason that that's coming is, one, because of prophecy, and two, is because of the way, the manner of life these people live, especially our people, right? So here's actually the precept. It said in verse 11, and it says, "Seeing then that all these things shall be dissolved, what manner of persons are ye to be in all holy conversation and godliness," right? So when you go into that word godliness, I'm sorry, conversation, excuse me. Wait, let me go back. It's G391, and it says anastrophe.
Strong's G391. Anastrophe. Anastrophe.
So it says anastrophe. So it says manner of life, conduct, behavior, deportment, right? So we don't conduct ourselves in the same fashion that our people conduct themselves in the world. We conduct themselves as people who have a certain level of etiquette, a certain level of character, of morals. And that is one of the things that our people are missing. They're missing these different tenets to essentially conduct themselves in the midst of the heathens, right? The heathens are essentially supposed to look to us as an example, so they know how they're supposed to act, right? Jake is a trendsetter, but however, in this society, Jake is essentially the trendsetter in wickedness. Right now, you have people that are quote unquote complaining about black fatigue, right? They're complaining about so-called nigger culture, and nigger culture really is just an offshoot or an experiment of essentially Esau's culture, the way that he treats his own people. But essentially the ways of the wicked have seduced Jake into behaving in this filthy, abominable way of the lifestyle, right? And Esau has essentially weaponized our people in regards to incentivizing this wicked culture, this wicked conversation, this wicked manner of life. Because when you speak, the things that they speak about is not conducive to life. It's conducive to death, and it brings forth death, right? So that's pretty much, you know, um, what inspired this topic, right? So let me go back to, let me just go to my Apocrypha real quick. 1 second. Let me find it. Let's go to Sirach 27, because when you speak to people, it shows in a different way in life that, that is vastly different from yours and theirs, right? And sometimes that's another thing also from, one of the things you might notice also, you may not even have to say, certain things. Just your presence alone is very, very loud. It's very, very, when you tell people, for example, when you don't do certain things, or I don't smoke, or, I don't eat shrimp or pork or anything like that. They look at you because they're like, they can't, is that they're covertly being ridiculed, but they don't know how to, compartmentalize what is being said. You know what I'm saying? So where was I? Okay, Sirach 27. Okay, I'll just read verse 11 and I'll jump to 13. This is the discourse. So Sirach 27 and 11. And it says, the discourse of a godly man is always with wisdom, but a fool changes at the moon, right? So when you speak to a godly man, when you speak to brothers, when you listen to the apostles and the elders, there's always gems and nuggets, information that is essentially very beneficial, conducive towards life and, bettering yourself, whether it's, through health, understanding, get deeper understanding as to why the laws are needed upon the planet Earth, right? Why, why we understand that Yahweh Bashim Shai's ways are higher than our ways, to roughly paraphrase Isaiah, right? This is, I'll read verse 13. I'm sorry. Yes, verse 13. And it says, the discourse of fools is irksome, and their sport is in the wantonness of sin, right? So that's why it's very, very bothersome, because their discourse, their conversation, their manner of life is very, very dim. It's very, very shallow. It's very, very vain. And that's the thing. And that's the culture that Esau wants to create. He wants to create a culture of a bunch of AI robots, of these people that can't really think for themselves. They can't critically think. They don't question anything. They're just dumbed down to a level where they kind of just, they just do the same thing over and over again without actually questioning the things that are being said to them. They're not very circumspect. They're very, very overly jolly. They're pretty much in the house of mirth, right? They're in that's, they're the congregation of the dead, right? So let me read that again. Sirach 27 verse 13, and it says, the discourse of fools is irksome, and their sport is in the wantonness of sin, right? So when they think about things, of the things that they want to do, it's riddled in sin. And what is sin? Sin is transgression of the law, right? The things that they think about, that they want to do, especially our people, a lot of the behavior is sinful. When you think about, like, for example, when you listen to a lot of rap lyrics, one of the things that they always like to glorify in, is sleeping with another man's woman, that is heavily, heavily glorified in gangster culture, in rap culture, in so-called black culture, but that is against our actual culture to do certain things like that, right? That is the type of conversation that they're having, right? So, and what does that do? That type of conversation brings forth death and decay and destruction. Okay, so this is let me read. Actually, that was it. Actually, okay. Let me go to. I think it's Sirach 21. Where was I? Just 1 second. Okay, this is Sirach 21, verse 11. And it says, He that keepeth the law of the Lord, Yahweh Bashem Shai, getteth understanding thereof. And the perfection of fear of the Lord is wisdom, right? So that's how we become wise. We understand that having a fear of the Lord is really the beginning of having wisdom. And going back to the topic of adultery, I'll use the example of our forefather Joseph. When the Pharaoh's wife wanted to lay with him and come on to him, what was his approach? He understood that, I have a fear of the Lord, right? So I'm not going to entertain this woman's advances, right? So what did he do? He fled from her, right? But that is actually having wisdom. If you put and if you tell our people today the way that they are, that type of action or what Joseph did, they would have essentially done the opposite. They would have entertained her advances and then taken upon the opportunity to actually, cop a feel, right? But Joseph understood that that was wickedness, right? Where was I? This is, I'll jump down to verse 20. And it says, the fool lift up his voice with laughter, but a wise man doth scarce smile a little, right? So, this is the mentality of our people. This is the mentality of people that you might speak with. They don't speak with, people that are essentially well-rounded, and that's another thing also. You're not going to find a very, very, well-rounded conversation, very spiritual conversation with these people in the world. You kind of have to, dumb yourself down and kind of meet these people. I don't want to say meet them where they're at, but there's only so far you can speak about certain things with certain people. So you don't try to go super, super deep, right? You kind of have to, essentially you're being wise as a serpent, essentially, right? And harmless as a dove, right? So, you don't come off, too, heavy, with certain people, and you learn to, maneuver in righteousness, right? So that's part of, the, most of the times you might just, as crazy as it might sound, which is not really crazy, but most of the time you might actually just have, conversations with yourself, right? Talking about spiritual things, talking about, things that are actually beneficial, thinking about the things, thinking and meditating on the ways of our forefathers, our history, prophecy, these are certain things that we're occupied in, right? So this is why when you think about the conversation between, men that have wisdom, knowledge, and understanding, actually fear the Lord, is vastly, 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 vastly different from people on the outside, right? It doesn't even compare, and the scriptures do say that the wisdom of this world is absolutely foolish, and it's true. It's absolutely foolish, especially the type of conversations our people are talking about, right? Oh, Diddy and Cassie and is it curry chicken or is it chicken curry? That's the low level conversations our people have, right? So I guess I'll end off with reading just this here. I don't want to make the lesson too long. This is Sirach 39 verse 1, but it says, He that giveth his mind to the law of the Most High Yahweh Ba'Shem Shai and is occupied in the meditation thereof will seek out the wisdom of all of the ancient and be occupied in prophecies, right? So we watch and pay attention to things that are going on in the world, to politics, and then understanding, and then we get wisdom from the ways of our forefathers. We use the scriptures to essentially time travel and get an understanding of our forefathers, of what Yahushua did, how certain men handled things, right? The scriptures say that it is the glory of the Lord to conceal a thing, but a wise king, to roughly paraphrase, would search out a matter, right? So we're searching out the ways of our forefathers because we've been so disconnected, from essentially our heritage. And Jake doesn't understand that going back into these ways is to actually acquire wisdom and nuggets to be able to help them in the present, but they don't see any value in it most of the time because they don't see a well decked out messenger, right? Speaking about the prophets. Okay, verse 2, and it says, He will keep the sayings of renowned men, and where subtle parables are, he will be there also. He will seek out the secrets of grave sentences and be conversant in dark parables, right? So, a person like this is going to be very, very well rounded, going to be very, very occupied in what's going on, and very, very studious, right? When you think about our people are dumb, as the scriptures say that, and it says, an ox knoweth his owner, and an ass his master's crib. But Israel does not know, my people did not consider, to roughly paraphrase. Our people don't consider, where they came from. Why is this happening to them? But yeah, I just wanted to, just kind of touch on. As a matter of fact, enough with this last precept. I promise this is the last one. Just in regards to conversation, and I'm sure there's this is something that's nothing new. 9-1 that brothers experience. This is Proverbs, I think it's 29. Right, and then when you think about it and you have conversations with these people, you realize their manner of life is absolute filth. So this is Proverbs 29 verse 27, and it says, an unjust man is an abomination to the just, and he that is upright in the way is abomination to the wicked, right? So our people's ways, their manner of life, their conversation is very, very abominable. It's very, very lewd. It's very, very filthy, right? This is why, the Lord is going to purge out, 2/3 of his vineyard and burn them, right? Get rid of them, because, that they are essentially especially a lot of these YNs too, because when you think about their conversation specifically, it's nothing but death, destruction, and decay, right? So, anyways, I guess I'll leave it there, but hopefully this lesson was edifying. Just like to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh Ba'Shem Shai. Until next time, I say Shalom.